Reminder as we go to the race, Pedro Delgado, who finished second behind Stephen Roach last year, is the current leader, 2 minutes 47 seconds ahead of the rest, and he likes the mountains too. Let's join Paul Sherwin and Phil Liggett with the riders on the slopes of the first climb.
As we join the leaders here on the approach of the first big climb in the Pyrenees today, there is this amazing time gap, 11 minutes 45 seconds, this group of 13 riders, and the rider second from the back on the right there is Robert Millar of Scotland, wearing the team leader's number of 101. This, Paul, I suppose to some degree the sort of break that Delgado would have encouraged today.
Well, it's always the kind of thing that's going to happen with a team that aren't as strong as Delgado's team, because they've still got a week to control this race, and they're not going to chase down every move possible. The best placed rider in this place is 19 minutes behind, and that's Frederic Vichot, so they've really let this move slip away, and they're obviously not too worried about chasing, because the gap will probably come down to something like under 10 minutes towards the finish. At the moment, we're getting time checks coming through that it's all the time. As we go back to the front here, you can see Stefan Rux controlling the affairs, and the teammates of Pedro Delgado in yellow there. Steve Bauer well to the front here, Alcala. All the real leaders of this Tour de France are sitting at the front of the bunch, just not too worried about this breakaway, because they're all watching each other, marking each other, because it's on the last climb that these boys are going to make any moves.
Well, Pedro Delgado, resplendent in that leader's yellow jersey now, on the border of his own country, Spain, of course, and there are lots of Spaniards here, nipped over the mountains today to cheer him on. The cars are lined down the two mountains in their thousands, but of course they're parked off the main road, which the riders have all to themselves here. The sensation of this year's Tour de France, of course, Delgado apart, is Stephen Rux, and now leading the King of the Mountains competition, that polka dot jersey. Number 192 that went through there, Steve Bauer. He's had a great day as well, a great tour indeed. But a day off perhaps for the race favourites, and let's hope it gives Robert Millar his chance to prove to us he is a man of the Pyrenees. He's won 2 stages in the Tour de France. They've both been in this range of mountains. Now he's free of the leadership of the Fagor team as far as he's concerned. The pressure perhaps coming off him a little bit, so he can concentrate on what he does best, and that's winning stages and riding in the high mountains without the pressures of having to lead the team.
That's Millar's teammate here, Jean-Claude Bagot, leading the string up this climb, because he must realise that Robert stands a very good chance of winning here again in Guzet, Neige, as he did a few years ago in 1984.
Well, it's a nice steady tempo down there, Paul. Obviously the big bunch, they were rolling along in gentle fashion a bit earlier on. It's a very hot day here in the Pyrenees, which is a little bit of a contrast to when we normally come down to the far south of France. Very often it's low cloud and extremely chilly weather, but maybe we've had the bad weather in the Alps and the cold evenings and cold nights, and we're going to have the sunshine for the rest of this tour. This, of course, will suit men like Pedro Delgado. He's going to enjoy the warm weather. It's going to give him the feeling that everything is on his side this year. A brilliant session in the Alps. Many people feel is winning the Tour, but of course he's no fool. He knows that things can happen. Danger lurks around the corner in every stage of the Tour de France, especially on roads like this where they're very narrow, the descents are extremely twisty, and as you know, Paul, things go wrong, especially on the descents when your tyres get warm.
Well, especially on the descent today, because it's a very, very technical descent. As you can see, the road they're climbing here isn't exactly a main road. The descent is quite dangerous, and there's 1 or 2 places where the tar, as you can see on the road now and again, the tar is starting to melt, and there's one of the Caja Rural boys going out at the back here. It looks as if it's Roland Leclerc, but he's still got another teammate in that front group, Mujica, who is a local Basque boy, so he's obviously trying to get up there in front of his home crowd.
Well, the day of the Spaniards perhaps in the Pyrenees, but maybe not. Bagot here is keeping a good tempo high. He knows he's doing it not for himself, but for his teammate Robert Millar, who is just sitting at the back of this group, content to let the pace be dictated to, because of course the climb up to Guzet Neige is still to come. A climb that Millar knows so very, very well. And it looks as though there's 1 or 2 problems now as the pace starts to get up. Claire, this is Régis Claire here, who's also being detached from the back of the group. So we're now down to 11 riders in that leading group. And this is the rider who's starting to keep the tempo nicely up for Millar and sending the rest of the boys out. Number 102, Bagot. Who else in this group, Paul, do you feel might offer Millar a challenge?
Well, obviously, one rider who won in a similar situation last year was Marcel Gaillon. Today's, although the two climbs are first category climbs, they're not really what I would rate as massive mountains. They're the kind of climb where a strong rider like Marcel Gaillon could get away and possibly slip away from Robert on the descent. But as you can see, we're going back to the bunch here, and we've still got Steve Bauer on the front, trying to impress Delgado. Up there as well is Rodriguez, Neige on the left-hand side of the road in the white jersey, as we get another confirmation that the group is slowly eating into this lead. But it's still, for a rider like Robert Millar, if he can get to the bottom of the last climb with 5 or 6 minutes to go, there's no chance of them catching him again. And I can't see really this front group being caught today. I think the front group is going to be the winning move, as it looks like Pinot in the red and white jersey with BH there is still to the front. Stefan Rooks in the spotted jersey. It was interesting to note in the Tour de France the other day they made a mistake when two riders started in the King of the Mountains jersey, Régis Simon and Stefan Rooks.
So the tempo from the main field, more concerned whereabouts of the leaders of the Tour de France, and they're all in this main field, rather than who is up the road today. This the sort of day that Delgado wanted. There's a nice souvenir for somebody, a drinking bottle from Steve Bauer, and another one goes as well. I mean, how many bottles of fluid do they go through, Paul, in a day like today? It's so hot.
Oh, it's hard to count. On a day like today, the riders will probably drink something between 3 and 4 litres. The Tour de France is one of the few races on the international calendar where you're actually allowed to drop back to your car and replenish your water supplies. Obviously, because it's so hot, because the race is so long, it would be dangerous to really to limit the riders to 1 or 2 bottles a day. So they can go back and get as many bottles as they like.
Well, when you think back to just a couple of days ago, that wonderful Thursday on the road to Alpe d'Huez, when Delgado destroyed the field, the only man who could stay with him was the rider now on the far left of the picture in the polka dot jersey, Stephen Rooks. And now he's still riding near the front, and Delgado guarding his gains. 2 minutes 47 seconds at the start today, and that may well be the sort of lead that he will make him feel very happy on a day like today, when none of the leaders, it appears, are willing to attack. Maybe they've had enough for today, at least, after that long journey yesterday, flying down to the Pyrenees. Tomorrow is a terrible day in the Pyrenees, and it could be every bit, if not harder, than last Thursday in the Alps. And of course, they're all very, very conscious of this. And this is the day, I think, that Robert Millar has felt his only chance in the Tour de France this year to win a stage is today. He's obviously told Fagor here to get up front and keep this pace going, and keep it going well.
Well, Phil, that's one of the reasons why I feel Robert Millar must have a very good chance today, because Fagor, who in his own right could stand a chance of winning this stage, is obviously sacrificing himself here for Robert. So I would presume Robert's had a little word in his ear and said, Jean-Claude, just keep the tempo high on the climb so that we can get rid of 1 or 2 of the riders behind, and I'll try and get away on Guzet Neige. He must know the climb like the back of his toe, and I suppose he's often dreamed about that first stage victory that he got in the Tour de France.
Well, let's think back to that first victory. It was in Luchon, and he finished ahead of Jean-René Bernadotte on that occasion when he came flying out of the sky off the mountains into the finish. But this year, the last time that Roberts came up here, he also won the stage at Guzet Neige, and it's interesting to note then, in 1984 it was, that he won that stage. In second place was Luis Herrera, who started this year a favourite for the Tour de France, and the third man, a man called Pedro Delgado. And Delgado now is in the main field, and Robert Millar is out again. There he is, thinking, I'm sure, of the road he knows so well to Guzet Neige, the road he knows he can win, if only he can raise the effort now and convince himself he can win. Because I think, Paul, Robert had a big battle with his own mind this Tour.
Well, I think it wasn't, the blame is not all on Robert's shoulders. It's really a little bit to do with the upset in his team. The rumours were around that people were threatening. For instance, Sean Yates was threatened with the fact that if he didn't sign a contract for the following year, they wouldn't put him in the team. And coming into the Tour de France with such amount of trouble in the team, it's no good for the riders' morale. And I think that's probably what upset Robert a little bit. And he was thrown in at the last minute as the leader of the team, which was a role that he didn't wish to assume. And now he's got rid of all the pressure. I think he said, since the start of the race, really, he said that he'd like to concentrate on one stage, and that's what he's doing today. Well,
no sign of anybody wanting to push the pace as we climb up the Col d'Agny. Of course, there's still the descent to come, and then there's the climbs up towards the finish. The mountains today, the roads are turning up and down valleys, heavily wooded valleys, and eventually coming up towards a sunny finish at the top of Guzet Neige. One or two new riders beginning to make their effort here.
It's Mark Sargent on the front here. He's a rider who's, although he's got good climbing abilities, he's never really shown in the climbs in the past. So he managed to win a stage in the Tour de France last year with a long, lone breakaway, which was pulled off at quite a surprise to the rest of the bunch, because they were coming down him so quickly in the finish that it surprised one or two of us by managing to stay in front there. That's Martial Gaillon tucked in there in second place. And in third place, a man to watch when they come to the descent is Frédéric Vichot from Wyman La Swiss team. He's a rider who, if they get to this descent all together at the top, he might try and slip away, because along with Sean Yates, Vichot is probably one of the best descenders in the continent.
The riders now having gone away at 68 kilometres today, and are now approaching the 135 kilometre point of this long stage. You get a little bit of appearance there as you see the angle of the road taken from the helicopter flying alongside the riders, and you can then appreciate, I just don't know where these riders find the strength from, day in, day out.
Well, Fagor there, having done his work for Robert Millar, has slipped to the back a little bit, and you can see him second from last there, showing it, rocking his shoulders quite a bit, his head swinging about a little bit. I think he's given his due to Robert, and now it's up to Robert to reap the rewards of the work that Fagor has put in.
Mark Sargent looks over, has a word. He offers a sponge, in fact, to one of the other riders in the race, Gaillon. But Gaillon just comes on through, keeps the pace high. Vichot tucked in nicely with him.
Well, that's the amazing thing sometimes, Phil, about the Tour de France is, although these riders will cut each other's throats to win a stage, when they get to the mountains, when they get in a group like this, if they get a bottle of water handed up from a spectator, they'll share it around. They won't drink it all themselves. It's real camaraderie, and they'll try and look after everybody else. As we can see here, coming to the back is, I think it's Bouvatier, the French hopeful. He was a big hopeful for many years in France, and he never really came to grips with it. He rode for the System U team of Cyril Guimard for a number of years before expatriating himself and going to a Spanish team, where he seems to quite enjoy the life with no pressure on him.
Well, Paul, these 11 men have made their breakaway move. It looks to us like it's a good one, and at last we're able to tell you Robert Millar is in this group, and now they will shortly be going up towards the top of the Col d'Agnès, and then the finishing climb of Guzet Neige to come.
Plenty to come then, more from the future. Bouvatier has jumped away, and Millar is chasing him. Here's Phil Liggett.
Millar in a difficult position here, because he won't want to waste all of his energy at this stage of chasing down Bouvatier, because if he catches him up, somebody else might attack.
Well, Phil, there's been a reaction straight away, and I think, in fact, Robert must have been listening to us, because it looks to me in the white headband there as if Robert Millar's coming across to Bouvatier himself. He's obviously got the bit between the teeth today, and he doesn't want to let this victory slip away from him. Before,
sorry, Paul,
sorry, I was just to say, before Fagor did all the work, so Robert must have said to him that he's in a superb day, and in fact it is Robert Millar coming up there in the red and white jersey of Fagor MBK with the headband on. And look at him, he looks like a skull at the moment. He's lost all that weight during the Tour de France, as we get confirmation that the lead is coming down a little bit, but not massive amounts over this last 20-30 kilometres.
Oh, it's hardly moved, Paul. We've lost just over a minute, in fact, of this enormous lead in the last few miles. That's not quick enough to bring back these boys today. The field assessing that with Vichot, the best placed rider in the front, almost 20 minutes behind, they can afford to give them 10, reduce that in the final miles. And so what if they win by 5? Delgado won't be too worried at all. This is now a race for the stage here, and Robert Millar is showing to us that he's going to take part in this Tour de France, because he's gone up to Philippe Bouvatier, a rider who's rather ridden the Tour de France on 2 occasions. In 1986, he didn't finish. Last year, he finished only 69. And look at this now. Millar is now showing you his climbing legs. Robert Millar is now starting to really turn on the style. There's a little bit of resistance here from Bouvatier. Millar checked over his shoulder to see what the acceleration did, and he's got the gap, but Bouvatier's found the courage to come back. Millar goes again. That's the sort of attack a climber can do. Kick once, let your man think he's got it, then kick again. And this time, Paul, he may have him.
Well, he's obviously pulled quite a little bit away, but he looked over his shoulder a couple of times just to check this won't be Robert's real break for glory. This is just a check to make sure that the bunch behind splits to pieces, and if anybody does come up, they won't be too dangerous to him. As you can see, we're going round the corners here. It'll level off a little bit, and Bouvattier should be able to get back to Robert Millar's wheel. Robert's now not looking back at all, but time trialling to the top. And this is why Robert has carried on that move, because it split the bunch behind completely. That looks like Stevenhagen there, followed by Marc Sergent, and I think Vanotti from the Chateau d'Ax team. Coming across the gap, looks to me as if that was Marcel Gaillon. And there, Bouvattier still struggling, and Robert looks to be going out of the picture. So maybe this has been a good move. He's just got rid of a man he was probably scared of in that move, and that was Frédéric Vichot, who could have got rid of Roberts on the descent.
And here's Millar now, turning up a gear now. He's riding the bigger gear. I think he's just gone through the kilometre to go board there to the summit of this climb. Well, Millar won alone at Guzet Neige last time, and now he's going again. He's still a long way to ride, you know, but maybe not in Millar's terms. He's about 13, 14 kilometres once he gets to the foot of the climb, but in all now he's still something like 15 miles, 24 kilometres from the line. So Millar really must be feeling he has the confidence here. He's hammering home the advantage of the last kilometre or so of the climb of the Col d'Agny. And if Millar can just open the gap here, now he'll be down the other side. Paul, do you know this climb? Do you know what the descent is like?
I know the descent. It's very, very dangerous. I've never been down it myself, but it's very narrow, lots of gravel. And it's the kind of descent that a lone rider can keep away, because if Robert's got the technique to get around these corners, but he hasn't opened up much of a gap on Bouvattier. And just down there in third place was Marcel Gaillon, who is an expert at cyclocross. And I think with the kind of gap that he's got at the moment, he should be able to get up to Robert on the descent, which will be an advantage, because there's quite a long descent and a little bit of a valley to get to the bottom of Guzet Neige, and that will be a help to Robert. But then when they come to the last climb of Guzet Neige, he should really have the ability to get rid of Marcel Gaillon. Looks to me as if this is Girotto here setting the place, followed by Vanotti from the Chateau d'Ax team, who've come to the Tour de France and actually showed themselves to be quite good. Back up here to Robert, who's got a superb style here. The nodding here, as you can see, when you get a little bit of an expert's eye, you can see that's not the nodding of a man who's tired, that's the nodding of a man who's getting into his rhythm and really getting this gear over.
So it's been a tough passage for Robert Millar in the Alps. Now he's on the playground he loves most, the metalled roads of the Pyrenees. He's always ridden well down here, and maybe that's given him the fillip he needs now to push on to try and win at this stage in the Tour de France. He's won two already over his career. He's also won the King of the Mountains, the only British rider ever to do that in 1984. The same year, in fact, he went on to finish fourth in the race. Now, Millar can smell the summit of this climb, because when the crowds get this thick, it's not far to go, and it's probably only just over that ridge, and then it's a long, twisting descent, which winds away. In fact, where that helicopter is flying, it goes back on itself, and then it climbs over the next ridge, and then he'll be up on the climb of Guzet Neige. It isn't very far as the crow flies, of course. The hills twist and turn around in drunken fashion in the Tour de France. There's the banner now. Through the banner goes Robert Millar. Millar now has a long descent in which he must make time. But goodness me, Paul, I hope he takes no risk on this descent.
Well, I think Robert knows the Pyrenean descent quite well, because the Pyrenees have always smiled for him. He's won his stages here in the Pyrenees before. Both his stage victories in the Tour de France have come from the Pyrenees, one at Luchon and one at Guzet Neige. As we go back down to the chasing group here of Girotto, Vanotti and Marc Sergent, they're going over the summit just only half a minute behind Robert Millar, which is not a great deal, especially on a technical descent like this one. I would think Gaillon would probably be able to come up to Robert, because he's obviously gone over maybe 10 seconds down, and with his ability to be a cyclocrossman, he should well get across to Robert on this descent.
And now we're back here for the first time for a little while with the main field, the yellow jersey Delgado stamping his command of authority on this race. He just sits at the front, keeps his rhythm high. He won't be at all worried now by the attack by Robert Millar, but 2 weeks ago he would have been. He wouldn't have let Millar out of his sight. Such now is the move of the man in yellow. And Turnish too, with the flowing hairstyle that makes him so easily identifiable in this race. A teammate last year of Pedro Delgado, now the two riders in opposite camps. Well, Millar is pushing this, but I don't think he's going down this hill fast enough. I think the group are bringing him back as he continues the descent, and Bouvattier taking no chances at all, just monitoring the movements of Robert Millar. But this has put Millar now in a wonderful position to springboard on the climb up towards the finish. Beautiful day in the Alps, in the Pyrenees rather, as it wasn't in the Alps. It was cold. It's really warm and pleasant down here. And perhaps that's why Robert Millar is now feeling it really is the Tour de France now. Hot, sunny and mountainous.
You see here as we go around these corners, Bouvattier lying off 5 or 6 lengths, so that if Robert does make a mistake, he can change his line and either go underneath him or around the outside of him if he was to come off these. And now, when the rims will be heating up quite a lot, and the riders will be hoping that the mechanics done the job properly of sticking the tyres on.
Well, the constant braking by the riders on these descents, it makes the rims of the bicycle wheels extremely hot. So hot, in fact, you can't touch them when you come off these mountains. But it does tend to loosen the shellac that keeps these tyres stuck onto the rims, and it's not uncommon for them to turn round on themselves and then roll off the wheel, and of course down go the riders. It's not the sort of thing, Paul, you think about when you're going down, is it?
Well, you try not to. It's something that I think you think about when you're getting near the end of your career. When you're a bit younger, you tend to expect the mechanic to have done his job properly, and I'm sure that whenever you watch Sean Yates going downhill, that's something you never ever think about. As we flick back to the bunch here, you can see Pinot on the front. None of these riders really wanting to set too much of a pace, because they know that the decisions they're going to make are going to be on the climb of Guzet Neige. On the left-hand side there, I think, is Jesus Rodriguez from Delgado's team. On his right-hand side is Miguel Indurain. Coming up in the middle in the fluorescent jersey is Jonas Koum. And with everybody looking very, very comfortable. And I think it looks as if somebody has gone off the edge here, unless these are spectators trying to get back up. I don't think so, though.
No, there's a lot of people looking down here, Paul. And it looks as though one rider may well have gone down here, the way the people are crowding on the edge here. Well, these are the certain dangers of the Tour de France. It happened in the 1960s, in 1963 to be precise, when Roger Riviere went off the edge of a mountain, and the helicopter had to bring him off in the end, and he never ever raced again. It is looking like somebody is climbing up here.
I think it's Mark Sargent. It looks like an orangey coloured jersey who's gone down there. And in fact, it looks as if there are 2 riders.
The camera's going right into the bushes here. These are the dangers of the Tour de France all the time. And the police motorcyclists have stopped there. And the riders are going to be coming down here very shortly at high speed too. That'll be the next problem that the Tour de France is going to face. Last year it was Henrik de Vos who was in amongst the bushes, and Kim Andersen, when again the problem was caused by the tyres melting on the rim, on the shellac, and rolling off, and the riders plunging down. This is now 11 minutes 5 seconds. The main field have been timed behind Millar as they come over the top of the Col d'Agnès. So that's quite clearly now, Paul, as Ternise pads himself up for the long descent, keep his chest warm. It's quite clear now that this group is not going to affect the front today, and there is a real chance now Millar will make it.
Oh, it's good to see you
here now. Bouvattier doing a fair